Hey, today I want to talk about the different types of grief that there are out there. I personally hate putting a label on my grief. To me, grief is grief is grief. However, there are different aspects that we experience within our grief over time. I think we all agree that grief is a normal and natural reaction to a loss. Grief is a normal reaction to a loss of any kind. But even the word grief can be deceptive, just as it applies. We think it's just this one thing that we're experiencing. And the truth is, it's not singular. Grief is an emotional experience that takes place in our heart. It is what our heart feels when we absolutely go through this event. In reality, we don't just grieve from death. That is huge, and we have to understand this. We don't just grieve when someone dies. We can grieve for non-death experiences. And there are over 45 known losses that we know the heart can experience, and it can go on to the title of grief. On the end, I'm going to go through that list and break down some of those grieving experiences. There's probably going to be 4 or 5 videos in. So let's talk about some of the most common types or labels that people want to place on grief. It's not a bad thing to place a label. Understand me. It's not a bad thing. It's just that I think that when we get stuck with the label, like many grievers come into me and they tell me, I have been diagnosed with PTSD. When we get stuck with this label, we want to go into that box of PTSD, and then are we allowing ourselves to grieve? Okay, here we go. The definition of grief. Grief is normal. Grief is natural. Grief is a reaction that takes place in our heart to a loss of any kind. Grief is the conflicting feeling caused by the end or the change of a familiar pattern of behavior. Sharon was my best friend. She was here every day. We talked every day on the phone, twice a day. That pattern ended. She was no longer there for me. That broke my heart. Yes, it was Sharon, but that's the overall definition. Grief is the feeling of reaching out for someone who's always been there, only to discover when I need them one more time, they're no longer there. Me needing her for advice as I had the 15 years before, and her no longer being there, was an absolute grieving experience for me. Grief is the feeling of reaching out for someone who's never been there for you. He was a drug addict. He was an alcoholic. Every time I need him, he never showed up. Now he's dead and I still need him and he's no longer here. Now he's alive and I still need him and he's no longer here. Grief is the feeling to discover that they are no longer here anymore. It is the pain that our heart is feeling, that they are no longer here.